Okay, so welcome back. This is part 4 in our series where we're showing you how to write this very simple C# Visual Studio console application. And what this application does is it allows you to, in the background, automatically, at whatever scheduled time and date you want, to back up the files and folders on your computer to either another hard drive on the same computer, or it can also back it up to a shared folder on another computer on the same network. And it's a very simple application, and it does something that's really important. It backs up your files and folders, and it does it automatically in the background. You don't even know it's happening. And we showed you how to design this in the beginning, and we also showed you in another video how to use the included task scheduler application in Microsoft Windows. It's a free application that comes with Windows. A lot of applications use it. And as you can see here, I've added this application called File Sync, and it will automatically, at 7 p.m. every day, it will run this File Sync console application and update whatever files and folders I've specified. If they're new or updated, it will automatically copy them to the backup location, and it does it all in the background. You never know about it. So what we're going to talk about in this video is we're going to finish up the application so that we can actually use it. Now, this is an application I'm going to actually use in my daily life. Previously, I've used a free application for many years. However, I try to avoid free applications that I download from the internet. Whether they're free or open source, I try to avoid them for a bunch of reasons. One reason is I don't trust them. In fact, this application I've been using called Sync Folders. Recently, I tried to see if there was an update, and I got an error that said the website has some malware or something. So, of course, you got to worry about that. But also, I like to be able to not only customize my applications to what I need, rather than, most applications tend to go on and get more and more features that honestly you probably don't even need, but they like to make it everything to everybody. But also I like to build applications myself if at all possible, because it helps to build skills. So unlike a lot of people on the internet now who like to just copy and paste from GitHub or wherever, that doesn't help you build your skills. So I like to do things like this myself. So we've talked in the previous videos about the core of this. And what we're going to do is, like I say, we're going to tie up some loose ends on this to make it so we can actually use it. And we're going to look at some things we need to do to make this actually usable in the real world. So as we mentioned before, the input to this console application is basically a CSV file where we specify what's called the source folders and then the target, and those are separated by commas. And basically, you're telling it we want to take any new or updated files and folders in this source directory and copy them over to the target directory if the target directory is accessible and if those files and folders don't already exist. So here I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, what are called rules that this is going to use as input, and it's going to update and back up all of these source directories to the target directories. Now, one of the things we talked about was we need to have some feedback on what happened, because you can get target directories that aren't available, they're not accessible, the computer's turned off so you can't get to it. So it's nice to have a summary of the data. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to add a summary file to the log file that we had before, and this is basically going to summarize the results of all of the rules that we ran. For example, a time and date. We're also going to add a feature in this called simulation mode, and that's really important, because what it does is it says, okay, go through the steps of making believe you're backing up and copying your files and folders, but don't actually copy the files and folders or delete any files and folders. Just make a count of how many you would have. And that's really good if you're going to test your code to make sure everything's working. You don't want to make a mistake in your code and actually overcopy the files and folders or delete some. Also, we're calculating a total elapsed seconds for all of the rules. We've got 4 rules. The total number of new folders generated is 0. Total number of new files generated is 1. How many target files were overwritten? How many megabytes total were copied in all of the rules? And then how many target files are actually newer than the source files, so we didn't do anything. So this is a nice summary that we're going to show you how to develop in this video for this application. And then we've got the detailed log file that we talked about before that has, for each individual rule, it's got pretty much the same data. It's got a time and date, a rule number, what are the source and target paths. It tells us, was the target path accessible or was the computer turned off, and so on. With any exceptions, maybe the target folder was there, the computer was turned on, but we didn't have permissions to access it. So that would give us the exceptions. The new target folders and number of files, how many were overwritten, how many megabytes were copied for that rule, and then the names of the target folder and file paths. And we've got that summary for each of the rules, so it's a kind of an in-depth summary of what was actually copied over in the rules. So now here's what we're going to look at in this video, some of the updates from the previous video. As we showed, we added a summary data file printed to a separate file, which basically summarizes everything. We added more properties to our rules class. And as we said before, our application is basically this console application, but we've got this rules class that for each rule, each backup we want to make from a source directory, we've got data associated with that rule, which is one line in the input rules file. Rule number, source path, target path, is the target accessible, elapsed time, number of new folders, number of new files, how many overwritten, number of megabytes copied, how many target files are newer, and then we're going to be adding these lists of strings, which are the exceptions, where each time we get an exception, something not accessible, we're going to put that exception in a list of strings so that we can parse it and use it to get some information on what actually happened in our backup. And then also the list of the new folder paths, the new file paths, and then we're going to add a constructor that basically initializes some of those properties. So that's our new rules class. Now also, when we go through and do this, we will find out that we're going to have a bunch of access denied errors. So what we're going to do is we're going to add some try catches when we go through and try to access some of the other files and folders that we're trying to back up to. So we're going to add some try catches to check those. As we said, we added some lists to the rule class. We're also going to need to have some way to verify our results. And that's one of the nice things about having this previous piece of software that does these backups. We can check our results versus that other piece of software and see if they're pretty close. So keep in mind, we're going to be probably on your computer, if you're going to back up, you're going to do thousands and thousands of files and folders. And you want to make sure that you're not missing something. So since our previous video, I looked through and ran some tests on our code and found out it was missing some subfolders. So it's really important that you have something you can compare against. And that's the case with any software you write. As I mentioned, we did some code testing and verification by setting up rules and watching for the results. Really important in this case where you're doing such complicated recursing through subfolders and sub-subfolders. As I mentioned, we found out the existing code wouldn't copy, update some files in existing target folders, so we had to make some modifications. So here's some of the things we're going to look at in this video. Now, the existing features that we talked about, we're basically taking a CSV file with some rules. We're copying, overwriting new and updated source files to the target. We're using the task scheduler to do this at specified dates and times. Summary and detailed log output files, and also the simulation mode. So let's take a look at our application and see what we've modified. So here is our application. I said we've added some stuff to the rules class. We've got our properties, the total number of rules, the path where it will grab the input rules, the summary, the new file that we're outputting with the summary is going to be at this summary path. The detailed log is going to be at this log path. And then We have also, as we said in the input rules path, we can add an asterisk as the first character in the line to ignore that particular rule. We've got our existing rules class. So each time we have a line from the CSV, it's going to instantiate a rule and add it to this rules class. And as we mentioned, we've got the simulation mode. It's a Boolean. If we're in simulation mode, if this is true, it will just make believe it does the copying of files and folders and not actually do it, but just keep a count of how many it would have done. So those are the basic properties. Now in the void main, each time we run this, we want to delete the previous detailed log path and also the summary from the previous running of this, so that we only have one copy. You can, do whatever you want. You can append if you want previous results. Here we've got the get rules from file we've talked about before. We go to our method, get rules from file, and basically all that does is it reads in using a stream reader from that rules path. If the line is not equal to null, and if it's not null or empty, then we're going to go through and process it and instantiate a rule for each line and fill out the data. Now also I've added this if statement. If the line starts with ignore rule string, that asterisk, if that's false, then we're going to go through and process it. Otherwise, we're just going to ignore that line and go on to the next. So here we've got basically the same as we had before. We instantiate a new rules class. We do a string array with line split. So now we're going to have two values, a source path and a target path. And then we're going to, for each rule, we're going to apply those strings to the rule.source path and rule.target path. We're going to give it a rule number, and we're going to increment that for each rule. And then we're going to go through, as we did before, check target accessible. For that rule, we're feeding it a rule and saying, okay, is that target path, whatever it is that accessible? Because that's really important. And then we're going to say rules.add to the rules list, and now we've got a list of rules that we can operate on. And here's our check target accessible, no change from what we had before. So now we've got the rules. Now we can step through each rule in our list of rules and operate on it. So we've got the source folder. We use the directory info from the rule.source path, and that is our source folder. We start the stopwatch for that rule so we can get a timing, how long it takes to do that rule. And here we have if the target is accessible for that rule, then we're going to process it. If not, then there's nothing we can do. But here we're going to do update target directories. We feed it the rule and the source folder, and then update target files, and then rule and source folder, and go and process. And as we mentioned, we're going to have to do a lot of recursion to get the subfolders and the sub-subfolders and so on. So this can be thousands and thousands of recursions, each of these target directories. And then when we're done, we're going to stop the stopwatch and save log to file as we did before, basically the detailed log data for that rule. And then we've added the save summary to file. After we've done all the rules, we can save the summary data to that summary file. So really, these are the two workhorses, update target directories and update target files, and we do that for each rule. So let's take a look at that. We have done some modification to this. So update target directories, we got an IEnumerable. We're going to call it source folder list. And what I've done is I've added a try catch to this where I am trying to enumerate directories in the source folder. And if that doesn't work, then I'm going to say, okay, there's an exception. The reason why this was not able to enumerate directories in the source folder, maybe it's not accessible, we don't have permissions. So what we're going to do is we're going to add to the exceptions list in that rule the exception.string. So whatever exception happened, we're going to add that and then return. Otherwise, we're going to get a list of source folders in the source folder directory that we can go through and process. So if there is a list of source folders in that list, then we can go through and process them. So what we're going to do is for each var folder in source folder list, we're going to say the string.target path, we're going to go to get target folder path. We give it the rule and the folder. If that target directory doesn't already exist, this is false. And if we're not in simulation mode, we've added this so that we can only do these creating directories and copying files if we're not in simulation mode. So if we're not in simulation mode and the target directory exists, we're going to do directory, create directory at that target path. Otherwise, we're going to have an exception. Right now, we're not processing this. We can go through and process this. That's a thing to do for the future. But right now, it's just going to ignore it. And then we're going to add the new folder paths to our rule list of new folder paths. We're going to add that target path and then increment the number of new folders in that rule. And then we're going to have to update the target files for that rule. We've done the target directories. We now have to do the files. Now, it's very important, if that target path doesn't exist, we're going to have to update any target files in that folder, and then we're going to have to recurse through all subfolders, do update target directory. So this can get really kind of complicated, but it's really important that you go through and make sure that you're doing all this recursion so that you don't miss any files or folders. So now that we've got the target directories, here is our update target files. We feed it the rule and the folder, and we have a source file list. And again, we're going to add a try catch to what we had before, folder enumerate files. So list of all the files. And if that fails, we're going to add the exception, whatever the exception string is, to the exceptions in that rule and return. If it's successful and we have source files in that list, we're going to go through and process each one. So for each var file and source file list, we're going to get the target file path, and that's a string. If it doesn't already exist, if the file doesn't exist, and if we're not in simulation mode, we're going to try to copy that file to the target path. We're also going to calculate for that particular file how many megabytes were copied so that we can add all of those megabytes for all of the files in that rule to keep, for that rule, a total number of megabytes copied. So what we'll do is we'll say rule.megabyte copied, the previous value. We're going to increment that with whatever the file.length is, which is in bytes, divide by 104.8576, which is the base 2 bytes per megabyte. If that fails, we're going to have an exception, and then we're going to do the same thing, rule.newFilePath, add the target path, and increment the number of files. Now this last one was if the target file doesn't exist, we're going to copy it over. This is else if the file in the source is newer than the file in the target, we're going to overwrite it. We're going to take the source file and overwrite the target file because we have a newer version. So if the last write time is newer on the source folder than the target, we're going to go through and copy it over. Again, if we're not in simulation mode, we're actually going to do it. Rule.megabyte copied, calculate the megabyte copied, and copy file 2. Otherwise, we've got an exception. And then rule.newFilePath.add target path, rule.number overwritten files increment. Else if the source is older than the target file, we're going to increment the rule property called target files newer. So we're keeping track of when the target files are newer than the source files. So that's basically the core of what we're doing here. We also have this simple method, get target file path. We give it the rule, the folder, and the file. And it basically takes the source path and calculates a target path that matches that. And then the same thing for the target folder path. We talked about this before. Target path is rule.targetPath plus backward slashes and so on. And then the last thing is we're adding this method to save the summary to file. And you can do whatever you want with this, but this will give you an idea. We've got this total elapsed time for all of the rules, the total number of new folders, number of new files overwritten. So we're basically going to have to increment for all of the rules, get all of this data so we can print in the summary. And then for each rule class R in rules, our list of rules, we're going to calculate total elapsed time from each rule.elapsed time, number of folders, and so on. And this is just going to sum all of these values so we can get a summary. And then we're just going to do a stream writer to output that data. So we're going to say what's the time, was simulation mode on. And then what I'm doing here is I'm saying if the total elapsed time that we calculate for all of the rules was greater than 60, I want to reformat the total elapsed time to be minutes and seconds. So we're going to use this total elapsed time, minutes.toString plus a colon, seconds.toString. Otherwise, if it's less than 60 seconds, I just want to give a summary of the total seconds, and that's total elapsed time dot total seconds toString. And then here we're just outputting all of the summary data to the summary file, and then save log to file. This is what we pretty much had before. I've modified it a little bit, but you can look through and change that as you want. So that's about it for this one. At this point, this console application is all set to go, and I have tested against this other piece of software called Sync Folders that I've been using for many years, and I'm getting pretty much the same results. Really important you do that to make sure that your application is running correctly, that you do some tests. So right now I have basically moved over from this old Sync Folders to my own application, which is a whole lot more efficient for me. And you know, it's under my control and I can modify it as I want. Now in the future, of course, you can make other features. As I mentioned before, this Sync Folders, for example, has a user interface where you can get feedback data, you can type in the rules, so we can add a UI for generating rules and filters and viewing log data. We can also look at doing some asynchronous rule processing. Right now, this application with thousands and thousands of files and folders can take like almost 10 minutes. This sync folder often takes about half the time. I'm guessing they're using some asynchronous rule processing we can look into. However, keep in mind this is going in the background and it's taking very few resources. So is it even worth it doing it faster, whether it takes 4 minutes or 8 minutes if you don't even know what's happening? You can also do filters. You can get really fancy with, you know, what files and folders you back up and how you do it. Do you want to delete things that don't exist in the source? Do you want to delete them from the target so that you can have, for example, mirror mode, what I call mirror mode, where the target exactly matches the source mode. You don't have any outlying files and folders that don't exist in the source. So you can do ignore specified files and folders. So example, if you have a rule where you want your D directory folders to be copied over, maybe you want to ignore some of the subfolders. So you can get really, really fancy. I don't need to do any of this stuff, but it's something to keep in mind. I just need a basic copy and update my files and folders. I don't need to get into the fancy stuff. With the sync folders, it's got lots of different stuff. You can have orphan files and folders. You can get lots of different types of filters. But again, I don't really need that, but that could be something we can look at in the future. For now, I'm going to use what we've got so far and put that into regular daily use to back up my files and folders. So that's about it for this one. If you're liking these videos, I encourage you to hit the like button, subscribe, hit the bell notifications. But most of all, please let others know that we're here so we get some views. Really appreciate it. Otherwise, take care. Have a really good day. Thanks.